Today, the city of Detroit and its creditors were presented with a series of painful options.
Make the banks pay!
Retired city workers were warned of significant cuts.
We're finally at a point where we simply cannot kick the can down the road any further.
Creditors were told the city won't be able to pay them back.
I guess technically it already is bankrupt.
That the city government already defaulted on some debt.
Detroit's broke.
It got worse from there.
One of the most significant, yet least well understood pieces of modern international finance is public debt. In my home country of the United States, that number is $35 trillion. A sum so large that most of us everyday Americans cannot even begin to wrap our heads around how much money that is. Yet it is also a number so obscure that most of us don't really know what to do with it, how to fix it, or how it even got there in the first place. But public debt isn't just debt that we owe to others. A large chunk of that amount is an ever-increasing sovereign debt at a subnational level, like the US states, as well as at the municipal level. And when that debt gets too enormous, well,
I declare bankruptcy!
For example, Detroit, once a booming industrial hub, faced significant budget deficits, an exodus of residents, and massive debt exceeding $18 billion, leading to them filing for Chapter 9 bankruptcy in July of 2013, the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. Now, other countries and cities around the globe do in fact carry debt. But unlike the United States, municipalities here in Germany can't go broke. Why? Well, let's take a look. We recently wrapped up an election in the United States.
This is the worst!
Which also meant that fiscal spending and public debt were part of the national conversation. But when politicians talk about taxes and spending, they often say things that contradict each other.
A giant tax cut.
Tax deduction.
Cutting taxes.
We've got to extend the tax cuts.
Tax cut. Historic increase in defense spending.
A once-in-a-generation investment.
Here, I want to spend $7 or $8 trillion.
This is the craziness, but it never gets better because we always spend more money. Sweden balances their budget. Germany balances their budget. Over half of the countries of Europe run an annual balanced budget.
The math doesn't add up.
And although it's easy and relevant to call out the politicians of today, there has been decades of political research that supports the notion that politicians in general really have a very short time horizon when it comes towards considerations on public spending. In other words, they generally adopt an attitude of spend today, worry about paying for it tomorrow. And the result is incredible amounts of debt.
We broke it. We broke it. We broke open the budget. We're doing what we have to do, so thank you very much.
But what I think is really interesting is that while federal and state spending and federal and state debt tend to be part of the national conversation, municipal debt is far less well understood or discussed. Now, really great, highly informed channels like Strong Towns and Not Just Spikes have highlighted that one component of municipal debt is due to suburban sprawl. Basically, that we are so spread out that we don't have enough concentrated revenue per square kilometer in taxes to cover the bill when repairs or maintenance needs to be performed. And while it is definitely a very important factor, it's just one component of the issue. Because to be honest, even here in Germany, despite being much, much more highly densely populated than the United States and Canada, we still struggle to pay the bill when it comes towards fixing municipal infrastructure. Oftentimes, local residents who live on a specific street will still have to personally chip in when repairs need to be done, to the tune of tens of thousands of euros. Taxes here on this road in my village in Germany won't actually be enough to cover the cost of road repairs when those come due either. So the people who live on this street will have to personally fork over the cash. And even in the United States, the most dense city centers, municipalities with mixed-use occupancies, still struggle with municipal debt too. Take New York City, for example. According to researchers at the University of Denver, the Big Apple had a total public debt of $177.6 billion at the end of fiscal year 2022. That translates into a mind-boggling per capita taxpayer burden of $61,200. But while perhaps extreme, the debt situation in New York is actually really common. It is estimated that 53 of the largest cities in the US are not generating enough revenue to pay their bills. From Chicago to Houston to Portland and Atlanta, in all likelihood, if you're an American watching this video, your municipality is likely in a heck of a lot of debt too. There are a number of reasons why cities go into debt. Aging, existing infrastructure that needs to be repaired, something that gets especially dire when cities are spread out and have a low density per capita. But also operating expenses for social services like public transit, schools, fire, and police, and a major one, underfunded pension obligations and retiree health benefits. But what I was so curious to understand was, why does nobody talk about this? Well, that's because in reality, most people don't know about it. For US municipalities, the vast majority of their revenue comes from within, mostly from property taxes, although that changes a little bit depending on where you live. You'll get different figures depending on which think tank is conducting the research, but according to Pew, on average, 61% of municipal revenue comes from property tax, 16% from general sales tax, 7% from income tax, and the remaining 16% from other taxes, like those on entertainment and alcoholic beverages, for example. But as you can see from this graphic, the specific breakdown depends entirely on where you live. But the simplified takeaway here is that for the majority of US municipalities, local sources make up the majority of local revenue for that government. But regardless of where you live, the reality is that for most local governments, it's not enough. Few American cities out there can actually tell you exactly how much debt they have. That's because the way cities maintain their books and report on expenditures, there's actually no line item for debt. Now, don't get me wrong. Cities are still required to balance a budget. After all, they can't just go out and print their own money. But there's a big difference between balancing a budget and just simply creatively transferring debt around. In an article published by Strong Towns, which I'll link down in the description of this video, they do a much better job explaining the intricacies of how this precisely works. But the Cliff Notes version is that cities use cash accounting, which means that when a city borrows money, it immediately shows up as revenue in the budget. The only corresponding liability isn't actually the total borrowed, but rather only the repayment amount. And that's actually really interesting because how you or I might look at our total debt as being the sum of our home mortgage or our car loan, or if you're an American, your student loans, that isn't really how cities look at it. Cities only see the monthly or quarterly repayment. But what happens when that repayment amount gets too burdensome? Well, cities, much like private citizens, can and often do refinance their debt. But this isn't the kind of refinancing where a city simply exchanges a high interest rate loan for a low interest rate loan. Now, what happens much more often is that they'll just simply take a loan that was going to be due in the next 5 years and spread that out over maybe 15 or 20 years, effectively lowering the monthly or quarterly repayment on that loan. And again, with cash accounting, spreading those payments over a longer time helps to creatively balance the budget. But do this too often, and again,
I declare bankruptcy!
But a city that declares bankruptcy, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely out of cash. It just simply means that they know that they don't have enough to cover their future obligations. And of course, different states have different laws governing municipal bankruptcy. Some states don't allow it at all. In others, the state has to specifically permit a city to go through it. And this map from Governing Magazine shows different state laws that I think is actually quite helpful. But the sad reality remains that for the majority of US cities, whether they're big or small, sprawling or dense, They're likely up to their eyeballs in debt. And things are about to go from bad to worse, with many of the pandemic economic stimulus packages expected to expire in the coming months. Many municipalities are basically on a one-way track heading straight into a brick wall of financial insolvency. But before we dig too far into the numbers, I want to give a shout out to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Fun fact, most of the time when I'm editing these videos, I have no idea what I'm doing. My background is in architecture and geography, not filmmaking. When I started YouTubing, I didn't know a thing about lighting, filming, or editing. I had to teach myself how to use the camera and the software to upload videos and share with you. Now, I would like to think that my videos have become more refined over the years, but one of the best tools that I've used to help develop these skills has been with Skillshare. In fact, I recently took this cinematic map animation course on Skillshare to create the animations that you've already seen in this video. Pretty neat, right? But the learning opportunities don't stop there. Thanks to my membership with Skillshare, I can learn things. I have unlimited access to an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. So if you're interested in learning something new, Skillshare is the perfect place to start. From photography and illustration to graphic design, freelancing, music theory, and creative writing, you can find classes that will match your goals and interests. And since Skillshare is a platform that is designed by creatives for creatives, classes are taught by industry experts, excited to share their tools, techniques, and professional journeys with members. So if you're ready to learn a new skill, definitely head over to Skillshare by clicking the link down below in the description of this video. The first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So get started today. But here's the thing, other cities around the globe still take on debt as well. It isn't like these other municipalities are rolling in dough. They just manage it quite a bit differently. About 2 weeks ago, I was reading this newsletter from my local municipality here in Germany, which discusses our Haushaltsgelder 2025, which is our drafted municipal budget for 2025. And like a lot of municipalities in Germany, the outlook wasn't super great. Essentially, our mayor outlines a worse overall situation compared to 2024, and our city has little to no reserves for additional expenditure and investments that are actually probably urgently needed. Sounds a lot like the US, right? Well, as a taxpayer and a homeowner, I was certainly curious to know, how close is my city towards bankruptcy? Well, as it turns out, far from it. Because a city declaring bankruptcy is nearly unheard of in Germany. In fact, it is mandated in German law that if a city ever gets close to financial insolvency, the state will step in to help them balance their books. But to understand the bigger budget picture, we really need to zoom out here. From the outside looking in, Germany is a country that not only has a federal structure consisting of 16 federal states, 13 non-city states, and 3 city states, but is also very highly decentralized with 11,000 cities and large towns, independent municipalities and rural districts, plus other local authority associations. It's a country with traditionally strong and efficient local policymaking and administrative structures that are able to offer citizens and local businesses in the community a broad range of high-quality public services. Remember this graphic I showed earlier? Well, just as a quick refresher, this is generally how municipalities collect their revenue in the United States. But in Germany, the distribution looks like this. The 2 largest sources of municipal funding for German local governments are Gewerbesteuer, or municipal business trade tax, and personal income tax, roughly accounting for a whopping 37% of local revenue. By contrast, corporate tax accounts for a vanishingly small amount in the United States, less than 1% of local general revenue. In fact, local government corporate income tax revenue is low in part because only 8 states allow local governments to levy the tax. Hilariously, the local corporate income taxes in New York, that is New York City's corporate income tax, accounted for 77% of national local corporate income tax revenue in 2021. But what you'll also notice is that German cities and local governments rely very, very little on property taxes, with just under 13% of their total revenue coming from this. in contrast to, again, the 60-ish% in the United States. But don't get the numbers confused. Local income tax in that chart that I just showed doesn't necessarily mean the income taxes from local people. Germany uses a shared tax base in order to limit the over-dependence on property taxes and to help balance the disparities of needs and funding within local municipalities. So in other words, the income tax I pay in Germany gets pooled together and then redistributed around to other cities and counties in order to curb vast discrepancies between the haves and have-nots, ensuring that municipalities with small revenues have financial means that are not vastly different from average. Now, this does not mean that there aren't discrepancies from one zip code to another, but you're definitely not going to see the vast discrepancies that exist within the United States. For example, in the US, you're going to see huge differences in things like the quality of the roads, the quality of the public schools, depending on which zip code you happen to live in. And it's a huge reason why small to medium-sized municipalities, like the one I live in, for example, which is home to around 20,000 people, has public services and facilities that would be unheard of in a similar-sized city in the United States. In my town, we have a well-integrated bus system that is both timely and operates new buses. We have a brand new public pool that is objectively beautiful and low cost for us to use. We have e-bike chargers for visitors, great parks, great schools, museums, and community events that go on constantly. Now, we aren't problem-free by any stretch of the imagination, but we still experience a wide range of high-quality public services despite not being part of a major metropolitan city center. And there lies the key lesson that I think there is to be learned about the benefit of shared tax bases and shared revenues.
Well, the race continues for Amazon's HQ2, with the field narrowing to now 20 cities, including Newark, New Jersey.
In the US, instead of tax sharing, tax competition rules. State versus state, city versus city, luring both businesses and private individuals to move based on who has the lowest tax burden. But I want to stress this again. The same thing happens on an acute municipal level as well. And I'll use Kansas City, my husband's home turf, as a prime example. In order to incentivize companies and developers to do business there, city administrators gave them lavish property tax breaks. The program was supposed to bring in new jobs and businesses, but instead ended up draining civic coffers and starving local schools. Between 2017 and 2023, the Kansas City School District lost $237.3 million through tax abatements. But Kansas City is hardly an anomaly.
$155 million in tax breaks for Boeing.
An estimated 95% of U.S. cities provide economic development tax incentives to woo corporate investors. Tax abatement programs have long been controversial, pitting states and communities against one another in beggar-thy-neighbor contests. Their economic value is also at best unclear. Studies show most companies would have made the same location decision without taxpayer subsidies. Meanwhile, schools make up the largest cost item in these communities, meaning that they suffer the most when companies are granted breaks in property taxes. But by contrast, while tax incentives do play a role in attracting corporate investments, they largely don't impact local municipalities. Sure, Gewerbesteuer can vary from location to location, but it's legally mandated to be within a range to make sure that it's not these extreme differences from one location to another, and ensure that cities aren't starved of financial resources. And to be honest, most tax incentives don't come from the municipalities at all. They're much more likely to come from the state or federal government. Take the Tesla Gigafactory near Berlin as an example. Well, yes, they have been promised somewhere around 1 billion euros in tax incentives from the federal German government and the state of Brandenburg. The local municipality benefited enormously from the factory being put in place. Grünheide, the town where the factory is located, shared that the Tesla Gigafactory Berlin is the municipality's largest taxpayer, making a total payment of 6 million euros in trade tax in 2022. To put that number in perspective, the Grünheide treasurer stated that the entire budget for a community of 9,000 residents was around 20 million euros. But there's also something much, much larger that's going on that I think is really important to point out. When you make a local municipality dependent on local property taxes, and you don't share that tax base around, well, the consequence of that is that you're going to see highly economically segregated communities. And that's exactly what's going on today in the United States. The sad reality is that the US is more economically segregated today than in any other point in our history. We are a society of haves and have-nots, a society that incentivizes development in wealthy areas, a society which sees taxes as a personal expenditure and not a social contribution of solidarity. So you often hear things like, what are happening to my tax dollars? Why are my tax dollars going to a school that my child doesn't attend? Something that you would largely never hear somebody saying here in Germany. But at the same time, beyond having this very personal view of their own taxes, American communities have largely absolved businesses and corporations of paying their own tax dues. Many of the most fundamental tasks we need performed by the public sector in our daily lives are carried out by state and local governments. These critical tasks include educating children, maintaining roads, bridges, and other transportation networks, ensuring public order and safety, monitoring public health, and providing clean water. And while yes, these are local services that are used by local families, they're also used by local businesses and corporations too. In recent decades, state and local policymakers have consistently allowed corporations to reduce their share of taxes. Information obtained from 7 states reveals that more than 60% of corporations operating in these states pay no state corporate income tax. And depending on the state, between 11 and 27% of corporations with over $1 billion in federal taxable income pay nothing or next to nothing in state corporate income taxes. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again. The erosion of the corporate income tax burden has absolutely nothing to do with that corporation's ability to pay. In the United States, despite the fact that corporate revenues have declined, corporate profits are at an all-time high, yet they pay less and less in taxes than they did decades prior. Food for thought, certainly, as we head into a new administration. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video. Today I talked a lot about the differences between Germany and the United States when it comes to municipal income taxes and how municipalities fund public services. But obviously there's more than just Germany and the United States, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear about how your personal and local municipality has been handling public finances and whether or not you think their strategy currently is successful or not. Please let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Cheers!